Hello everyone, I'm Paul Chadwick and I'm the scheme organiser for the Interpretive Comments scheme in Microbiology and Virology. Now I'm Clinical Director at the Northern Care Alliance in Manchester and I'm based at Salford Royal and at the Royal Oldham Hospitals. So I'm going to talk today about the evolution of the Interpretive Comments scheme, and I was involved in this scheme from the outset. And it started off as an idea in 2008, chaired by Erwin Brown, and he got some microbiologists together as a panel to form a clinical scenario writing group. Subsequently, this was chaired by James Stockley and then myself since 2012. And all the time we've been supported by the UK NEQAS Microbiology Steering Group. So we started with the idea of providing some stimulating educational material, which was to be based on everyday clinical encounters. And we had an agreed template for this, and the template had a scenario with some investigations and results and some questions. And I'll show you some examples of this. We got peer review by members of the group, and we provided a commentary and some references. Now, initially, this was promoted at the Federation of Infection Societies in 2008 and through the Association of Medical Microbiologists and UK NEQAS, and also by word of mouth. And that got us going, and we launched the scheme in January 2009. It's worth noting that at this stage, it was very much a text-based scheme. So the answers were text-based, and from the organiser point of view, it required a manual collation of the results. So early progress of the scheme, there was a steady increase in participants, and we got up in the first few years to a steady 70 or so participants. Interestingly, we got a lot more people registered for the scheme, but around 70 were providing a regular monthly response. So the scheme provided a wide variety of clinical scenarios. Where required, we invited experts to provide a commentary in addition to the panel. We provided some key references, and we provided specific educational scenarios. And we wanted to know what people thought of the scheme, so we surveyed participants, and initially we found some logistical issues. So these were mainly website issues, and in particular, participants felt that there was some limitation in terms of space for a response. However, we found that 97% of participants found the scenarios to be clinically relevant, and they found that the model answers and references were both helpful and educational. So this is an example of an early distribution with the scheme, and we provide some clinical information. In this case, it's an elderly man with a lump in the neck. We tell you that a sample was submitted and that this was pus from a lymph node. We say what investigations were required, which in this case was microscopy and culture, and a result is provided. And of note, we say that highly mucoid colonies of gram-negative bacilli were seen on clade agar. We then asked a couple of questions. So we asked what was the likely organism and how should this infection be managed. So on the basis of that, participants would put in a text-based result, and you can see the box below where they're invited to respond. Along with the distribution, this particular one was in 2012, we had the ability to provide some images, and here you can see we've got a mucoid Klebsiella growing on a clade agar plate. So a month later, when the distribution has closed, we provide some answers. These are model answers, and we provided a commentary and references. And this is the sort of format that we provided back then. you can see that we said that this was a hypervirulent strain of Klebsiella pneumoniae, and that the abscess should be drained and the patient treated with an antimicrobial agent according to the results of susceptibility tests. We commented that the organism was likely to be resistant to amoxicillin, but susceptible to other beta-lactam agents and quinolones. So that was how we started out with the scheme. We also published alongside this the anonymized comments of participants. So this would include the model answers well, not model answers, the answers that the participants themselves submitted, and any comments that they submitted. And this is too small to read, of course, but just to give you an idea how the scheme works, you could see what other people had written. But from the organizer point of view, this had to be sifted in order to score and produce comments on the distribution. So quite a task, really. And to give you a flavour for where we got to, this was the first few years of the scheme, showing a fairly steady participation in the scheme and increasing registration up to above 400 by 2012. At this point, some decisions were made. A decision was made to move to multiple choice format for the questions and to use the existing UK NEQAS microbiology software to do this. So we felt that participants would be familiar with this software because it is used for the laboratory schemes in microbiology. So users would be familiar with looking at that. We decided to make a point of linking to guidelines and to standards for microbiology investigations, and reviewing the topics that we'd published over the last few years. You could see there was quite a dominance of microbiology and not so much virology. So we decided to even up this balance and produce roughly equal numbers of microbiology and virology distributions. We noted at the time that this supported continuous professional development and also supported laboratory accreditation to ISO 15189 standards. The other thing we did was to engage with the Royal College of Pathologists around discussions that they kicked off on personal proficiency testing in pathology. So where are we up to? By 2016, after the introduction of virology, you could see that participation had increased to around 200 people a month providing answers to the scheme. Some examples of the diverse topics that we were producing at that time. So 2016, we had pneumocystis pneumonia, Aeromonas wound infection, BK virus nephropathy, atypical mycobacterial infection, leptospirosis, PML with natalizumab, and so that's a virology distribution, Pseudomonas in ICU water, CMV in pregnancy, and Burkholderia pneumonia. So really, I just wanted to demonstrate that quite a variety of cases were going out. So survey again, this time in 2016, and as virology had been introduced to the scheme, it was thought to be important to find out what participants thought of the virology, and we confined the survey to virology. So 137 participants who were actively involved in the scheme fed back, and as we thought, most of them were UK based and most were medical microbiologists. The Royal College of Pathologists was pushing at this point that people participated as individuals in schemes like this, and rather than as groups. And we noted that most participated as individuals. Some fairly high scores were received on a range of topics. It was thought that they were appropriate. It was thought that the case information was good or satisfactory in most cases. Pleasingly, the respondents seemed to like the MCQ format, and the level of difficulty was thought to be about right. And most participants were spending around 2 hours per distribution. They thought it was useful for CPD, for appraisal, and for laboratory accreditation. So we introduced the new web platform in 2017. So this was a migration onto the existing platform that we use for other laboratory schemes. And this really was a great enabler because it now allowed monthly distribution reports to be provided that was bespoke to individual participants. Automated scoring was now possible, and the reports showed both aggregated results based on the 80% consensus of participants, so not scored if less than 80% consensus, and also individual feedback to participants with their own scoring and their own performance monitoring. We continue to provide a commentary, and we continue to provide references as before. The other thing that was enabled with this move was to allow annual participation certificates to be produced for people. And these could be used as evidence to support appraisal and revalidation. This is an example of an annual participation certificate. And you can see that for the year of 2019 to 20, there were 12 distributions. What the participant will see is a list of numbers of distributions. Normally you'd have a title in there as well, a short running title for each distribution, whether a result had been returned, whether it had been declared to be out of scope or not, and the total score. And this is summarized down at the bottom. Now, one of the bits of feedback that we've received from participants is that there's been a little bit of uncertainty in how to produce these reports because they are printed out from the website. So I'm just going to show you how to do that. And on the results entry screen, you can see there's a purple button called Results and Reports. So you can click on that at any stage. That will throw up a screen, and in the top left, you'll have Results and Reports and a grey button called Lab. So if you click on that, it will give you a list of reports that are available to you as an individual. So for example, previous participation certificates, and you just then click on download, print the one that you want. So the most recent years up to January 2021, that shows that participation has remained at around 200 after we introduced the new software platform. We took a little bit of a hit during the pandemic, so participation dropped down to about 160. It's recovered a bit since then. We're now getting 170 to 180 participants each month. I'd like to go through a recent case. This is one from about a year ago to show you what the new cases look like on the new web platform. So we still provide clinical information. In this case, it's a middle-aged man presenting to the dermatology outpatient department with an intermittent itchy skin rash. He was originally from Brazil, and on examination, he had widespread erythematous and edematous urticarial skin lesions, which progressed rapidly. And you're told that they move approximately 1 centimetre every 10 minutes. And that's an important clinical finding. You're told that blood tests show an eosinophilia, but no other abnormalities. Now, in terms of investigations requested, we've asked for feces microscopy for ovocysts and parasites. So there's a bit of a clue there that we're looking for a fungal, a parasite answer, and we say that the microscopy shows the structure seen in the figures. So again, we've attached figures to the distribution showing a parasite there, with tapered ends, and this is, of course, strongyloides. So this is the results entry screen, and you have the option of clicking not submitted because the scope is outside of your clinical practice. We ask you to put an explanation briefly in the box down at the bottom. So for example, if you're a virologist and it's a parasitology question, it may not be within your scope of practice, and you can opt out and you won't be scored on that if you do so. So we asked two questions in this distribution. We asked, firstly, which one of the following diagnoses best fits the clinical picture? And the answer is strongyloidiasis. And secondly, we asked which one of the following agents is the treatment of choice for this infection? And the first line treatment is ivermectin. So in this case, we just wanted one answer for each question. Sometimes we ask for two answers, but that's clear from the question that we're asking for two options to be indicated. So each distribution runs for about a month and then closes. And following that, a report is issued within about 2 weeks. And the report looks like this. This is a screenshot of distribution 4871 report. It shows the intended result and it shows the result given by the individual participant. So a repeat of the clinical information and investigations as a reminder. On page 2, we have some information for the individual participant. Always this looks back over the last 12 distributions. So we say what the number of questions was, the number of marks possible, and we provide on the left-hand chart a performance rating, and on the right-hand chart a summary of scores achieved. So the performance rating is important. It shows you the mean at 0 and then standard deviations or standard errors above and below the mean. So in this case, the performance rating is above the mean all the way through. It's about 1 standard error above the mean, and it's perfectly satisfactory. At the bottom of page 2, we provide some information briefly about the distribution. So usually I would comment how many participants took part in the distribution and how many declared this to be out of scope. I would then summarize the distribution, what it was about. In this case, we looked at the diagnosis and treatment of chronic strongyloidiasis. And in this case, the correct or intended answer was provided by around 90% of participants on each occasion. So the responses were either satisfactory or good, and both questions were scored because they achieved above the 80% consensus that we look for. At this point, I do look through the comments and look for themes arising, and if there are any, then talk about them briefly here, but refer mainly to the commentary on pages 4 and 5 of the report. That's usually where it sits. On page 3 of the report is a graphical representation of the answers, so you can see what other participants provided. So there's a summary of the responses received for each question, and the little arrows indicate the individual participants' answer, so you can compare yourself with others if you want to. The intended answer is highlighted in blue in both cases. And we also break down the UK participants and all participants. We don't normally see much of a difference in these. At the end of the report, usually on pages 4 and 5, occasionally running to page 6, is the commentary. And the aim of the commentary is to provide continuous professional development and to explain the results that we wanted to see in the questioning. It tends to be UK orientated because the scheme organiser and the panel are UK based. And the same with the references. These are concise, they aim to cover key points, and they're mainly UK orientated. So, to sum up so far, interpretive external quality assessment, or IEQA for short, encourages reflective learning. It promotes patient safety through CPD. It supports appraisal and revalidation and supports laboratory accreditation. It provides a form of formative assessment as part of education. And it identifies potential, and I stress that word, potential poor performance. And we're quite clear, and the Royal College of Pathologists is quite clear, that it's important to avoid any inappropriate concerns about variation in performance here. So that brings us on to the Royal College of Pathologists, and they have looked at this issue recently, and they got all the scheme organisers together and really looked in some detail at the whole subject of external quality assessment for interpretive comment schemes. Of course, these have been going for a long time, mainly in histopathology or cellular pathology. But you might want to look at this report. It's 2017. So the Royal College of Pathologists' view of IEQA is that this should be an individual professional judgment, so that they're not keen at all on group participation. They feel that it provides an important contribution to appraisal and revalidation, but that it is not designed to measure a participant's competence. And the focus, in fact, has been on compliance of IEQA schemes with what the Royal College of Pathologists sets out in the document. So the Royal College of Pathologists sees the following key benefits of IEQA: the promotion of standardisation, keeping up to date with developments and a framework for CPD, the avoidance of professional isolation, reflection on performance and the ability to take corrective action, input into accreditation, allowing external triangulation of findings, and a safe environment for the organiser to raise any concerns which would be anonymous from the scheme organiser's point of view regarding potential or possible substandard performance, and it allowed referral as appropriate. So where are we at the moment? The scheme is not accredited by the Royal College of Pathologists. I'm not aware of any schemes that are currently. I'm happy to be corrected on that. It is a fairly new initiative. However, it's important to note that many of the recommendations that the Royal College of Pathologists make are actually what we do anyway as part of this scheme. So there's pretty good alignment between the two. So the scheme allows personal performance monitoring. There's a clear scoring method, which is published on the UK NEQAS website. And this requires 80% consensus among participants. There is oversight by the NQAP, which is the National Quality Assessment Advisory Panel, which is a subgroup of the Royal College of Pathologists. And the scheme scoring method is agreed by that group. The scheme allows opt-out where distributions are not relevant to individuals, and the scheme allows anonymised and personalised feedback. There is an appeals mechanism. Occasionally people get quite anxious, understandably, about results, and in the first instance this is through the organiser, and there's recourse to the Microbiology Steering Committee, which Rahini chairs. So the scheme allows appropriate action in several ways, and the main way in which we do this is action initiated by the participant. So this is ideally a reflective response to any errors or persistent poor performance. And this is a major benefit of IEQA schemes. It allows for discussion during annual appraisal, so individuals can take the summary sheet along and talk about the diversity of the distributions involved, any opt-outs and any results obtained if they want to do that. The scheme also allows for action initiated by the scheme organisers. So after a year, if there is any poor performance, i.e. if the standard error is more than 1.96, this allows for annual letters to be sent out, and also annual letters based on poor return rate. And we do ask participants to return 2/3 of relevant distribution. So a virologist would be expected to do 4 out of 6, and a microbiologist 4 out of 6 or more if they want to do the virology as well, which many do. This is an anonymous scheme and is overseen by the NEQAS, so we report twice a year to both NEQAS and to the Microbiology Steering Committee. There is some scrutiny during laboratory accreditation, and this has been talked about quite a bit recently. Our view, and the view of the Royal College of Pathologists, is that the assessors are perfectly entitled to ask about participation of individuals in interpretive EQA, and they're entitled to ask whether IEQA is discussed or has been discussed at annual appraisal. And that's it as far as we're concerned. So on consensus scoring, an example from 2016, this is the middle of the first part of the financial year. You can see that all the distributions in this particular year allowed scoring for at least 1 question, and 2/3 allowed scoring for 2 or more questions. To look at this another way, this is a summary of the last 6 years, looking at how many questions were scoreable, and you can see that at least 1 question, which is the red bars, was scored in 90% of cases, and 2 questions were scored in around 3/4 of cases. That's the blue bars. There was a survey of participants in 2019, and this looked at the totality of microbiology and virology. A relatively low response rate, so 72 participants responded, 93% microbiologists, and it was felt that topics were about right, and there was satisfaction with scoring and performance in 89% of cases. Interestingly, the main issue around scoring and performance was uncertainty, and there was some uncertainty about methodology and whether misdistributions were scored and whether out of scope distributions were scored, and hopefully we've been able to explain some of that today. But essentially, if distributions are missed and no return is made at all, then that will be scored negatively. But if a participant declares something to be out of scope, that won't be scored. The satisfaction with the format continues, so most people, 94%, were satisfied with the format, and 94% were satisfied with the level of difficulty. So we feel that we're getting that about right. Some of the feedback suggested that we need to clearly explain all the issues within the main commentary of the report. That's issues relating to the questions and how we arrived at the intended answers. So there's a particular focus at the moment on doing that, and hopefully we managed to address that in the commentaries that you see. And then finally, there were the ongoing issues about accessing the annual record sheet, and the knowledge about this was quite low. So again, hopefully I've explained today how you do that. So in summary, you click on the lab button and then just select the report required. So finally, a big thank you to the scheme panel members. A thank you to the case writers, and a thank you to the expert reviewers where we've used them. And of course, a big thank you to the participants, because we wouldn't have a scheme without participants and feedback from the participants and comments that are made, which are really interesting and useful. We're supported by the UK NEQAS Microbiology team and by the steering committee and by NQAP. So big thanks to members of those groups. And as a final comment, I'd just like to remind participants, encourage you to submit draft cases to the scheme organiser, address provided there, for inclusion in future distributions. It doesn't have to be the final article. Often just the topic is good to give ideas. Often the case is good to give a scenario, but the detail of the commentary and the questions can be sorted out by the scheme organiser with you. So please don't be put off. You don't have to put in the full information for that. So thank you very much. And are there any questions?